Hi, this is Paul. Someone sent me an email and told me to check out the Rebel Wisdom video, COVID and the Sense-Making Crisis with B.J. Campbell, and said, well, actually, he got it from an estuary group where someone who is in Grand Rapids watches it and mentioned, oh, this Paul would be all over this video. And I hadn't watched the video. I can't watch everything that comes out on YouTube, obviously. But boy, were they right. So we have to take a look at this because I think you will immediately see how this pertains to a lot of what I've been doing over the last few years. Part of why this channel started was I could see the real disconnect between the world of the Bible and the world we live in today. And it's quite naturally a pastor's job to try to bridge that gap in preaching and teaching. And what is required is better understanding of both worlds and a certain language to bridge them. And what I discovered in this was that, well, it's not only the church that is working on this, but many who are working on these issues don't have as much knowledge of at least the biblical landscape, let's call it.
We've talked a lot on this channel about how COVID has acted as an amplifier of many of the existing problems, and most of all, the problem of finding truth or sense-making. And it's
Now, I want to talk a little bit about that because, of course, that's been the language that Rebel Wisdom has used in terms of sense-making. Well, what do we mean by that? And I think a lot of it is to something that bridges the two registers. We can use Machu Picchu's heaven and earth language. We can use lots of different language, but basically our engagement with the world and finding truth, I think, feels a little modernistic. I prefer Vervaeke's language of the sort of transjective, because that's really it's much more in the participation that language much better gives us a sense of what we actually do. It's going back and forth between the registers. It's the knitting together of heaven and earth, and of the upper, which is mind, spirit, heaven, and the lower, which is brain, matter, earth. Okay, those are the two registers.
Sometimes seems that the pandemic is perfectly calibrated to create maximum division and disagreement.
Perfectly. I love how he said that.
B.J. Campbell thinks he knows why. He's the author of the wonderfully named blog Hand-Waving Freakoutery, which is all about the sense-making crisis.
And what I've seen now really is that the people who were screaming about the sense-making crisis in 2018, they have lost all their sense-making ability post-COVID because they're trapped in elements of the sense-making crisis itself.
Now, this gets into a lot of subjects that David Fuller likes to discuss. And I did some video on the Megan Dom conversation, which gets into this too, which is that everyone is susceptible to, you can call it audience capture. Preachers are definitely susceptible to it. On one hand, when I listen to David Fuller and Megan Dom talk about, let's say, the rise of Substack for journalism, and both raised concerns that, as in terms of an institutional framework, it didn't necessarily set up the new sense makers, or as Rebel Wisdom would call them, the heterodox sense makers, to have a degree of independence, because what we tend to have with this mooks and knights context are the mooks basically keep the knights in check and try to keep the knights onto their narrative. And part of the problem is that these narratives sort of get stupid. Now, I'm calling them narratives, but they're not really narratives. And that's what we're going to get into in this video, because they've got some other words for them. I'm not ready to adopt those words as my own. I'm ready to use them conditionally for the sake of this conversation. But what they are spirits. They're quite providentially, Sevilla on Twitter asked, can you give us a better idea of what we mean by principalities and powers? Now, when I talk about principalities and powers, I'm obviously using language from the Apostle Paul. Others like Nate and waded in and said, yeah, but there's lots of other names. These are the beings. Michael Heiser, a lot of you mention him in the comments section about the rest of the gods, the rest of, all these other beings that are talked about in the Old Testament. Now, in kind of our Descartes, our Cartesian dualism, especially in modernity, we sort of imagine that these are things, and they are things in a sense, but they're not things like the cell phone stand. Okay. And one of the ways that modernity sort of disabled us was that we argued that, well, only things matter. And so matter is subject to materiality, or basically spirit is something dependent upon matter. That's basically materialism. That's why you call it. And I should just play the clip. Well, basically the clip was too long. The recession of modernity means that more and more people are increasingly open to believe that spirit shapes matter, and that spirit isn't just sort of an imaginary thing that we project up onto the sky. That a lot of what governs us, I'm trying to avoid the language of things because I don't like hyper thing, that terminology that we've used before. A lot of what governs us is by no means material, but our relationship with it goes back and forth, and we're gonna get into this as we go.
And don't realize that they're trapped in it. Jump from it being really just kind of a concept in 2018 to it being something so profound in 2020 that it is deciding it's a matter of life and death for some people, and nobody realizes that it is.
Okay, so he talked about let's say the IDW and the failure of the IDW protocol will use, what was his name? I talked to him with, I know you'll pick it up in the comment section. It'll probably bubble up. But the failure of the IDW protocol, that sort of the independence was lost, and when IDW members had to basically rely on their fans, and their fans became their source of sustenance, that was in some ways the beginning of the end. And we've seen this in journalism. We've seen this in a lot of different ways. And so we have a crisis of, again, as Rebel Wisdom calls it, sense making.
Because they're all stuck in it. It's that bad. It's pretty terrifying and strange.
So in this conversation, BJ goes deep and theoretical and introduces a new concept, the Egregor, which was originally an occult idea meaning a non-physical entity that arises from a collective group of people.
Now, when he said this, anybody who's been listening to my channel for a good long time knows that one of my go-to illustrations for materialist modern people about the word spirit is school spirit, because most of us know school spirit is real. We know it impacts, let's say, performance, behavior. All of us have a sense of school spirit of the school we went to if we went with enough people. We have a sense of participation in school spirit. We have the sense of the creation of spirit from human beings to collect a school spirit. And the same just scales up for nations and cultures and cities and groups. And this is sort of what Jonathan Peugeot was talking to, I forget who he's talking to, a story writer, when he says each conversation has an angel. And again, when you say it that way, it's going to be tough. It's not exactly going to work easily or well. So now this egregor, again, I'm just going to use it for the sake of this conversation because I haven't had enough time to do any background research on what that word involves, because the story of the word, the story of the spirit behind the word might impact the use of the word. when I would watch New Age people go from, they deconstruct their Christianity, they would be spiritual but not religious, and then suddenly they had a newfound excitement in spirituality, I would often see them opening doors that I would think, I wouldn't open that door. Well, why wouldn't I open that door? Because I have an idea of what's behind that door, and I have an idea of its power. So I would see New Age people basically because of the scrubbing that modernity did in terms of the middle realm. Imagine that, well, it's just Disneyland. Any spirit I find is going to be a good spirit. Nobody who has actual connections to the pre-Christian era, and you can find them like Native Americans, it's not that far away. Imagine that. Generally speaking, when Christianity would come into a place, part of the reason people flocked to Christianity is they wanted protection from many of the middle realm spirits. Just look at Navajo culture and the seriousness with which they look at spirits. Now, moderns would come in and say, that's nothing to be afraid of there. Well, the Navajo didn't think that. And so then when people go back into spirituality, they think, well, it's going to be safe for the whole family. But no one in the ancient world would think that. Now, we're especially focusing here on spirits that human beings create. We don't know enough to say that, but human beings participate in, and in a sense summon when they participate in certain things. Okay. Again, this has to be vague. And as we get later on and we talk about, let's say, the consciousness that a dog might have of me, it's intentionally vague. And so what they get into this video is a totally secular understanding of what essentially is spirit, but they're not going to use that word because then suddenly, basically in modernity, we still have this aversion to Christianity. I mean, you can bring in Buddhism, you can bring in Brahmanism, you can even bring in Islam and Judaism, but if you bring in Christianity, can't go there.
Something like a hive mind.
All the elements for the sense-making crisis create fertile ground for hive minds to develop, and the hive minds would exist at a layer up that you would not be able to tell that they existed.
Okay, now we're going to talk about this layer up, this level up, because I'm going to tie it into a conversation that I did with J.P. Marceau and John Vervaeke.
Is that true? I don't know. That's the thing that I've been thinking about recently, and it seems very explanatory for some of the stuff that's going on.
I hope you enjoy this conversation, and also just to quickly let you know, we're running our groundbreaking Sense Makers for Better. Sarah, BJ, welcome.
Thanks.
So you've got a blog called Hand Waving Freakoutery, which kind of the clue sounds like it's in the name.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to explain why you chose that name?
Wait a minute. I'm on a laptop. I was just on a desktop monitor. Come on, David. You're skeuomorphism. Stick to one. I was just going to say, I like the two monitor thing better than the laptop, but here we are.
Well, the blog evolved from a series of Medium posts that I did, and which originally were about gun policy. And that evolved from a bunch of Facebook arguments about what was true and what wasn't true about gun policy in the United States and gun statistics in the United States. And a lot of media was grossly misrepresenting things about guns in particular. And I was getting sick of cross-posting and copy-pasting the same stuff over and over again in people's argument feeds, because back in, I guess, 2018, Facebook arguing was a very, it's like the national hobby, right? So I've tried to find a place to stick it up. to where I could just post a link instead. And I found medium.com and I stuck it there. And then it went viral and ended up with 250,000 hits. My first article did. So I was like, oh, nuts. I guess I better write some more. So I wrote about 5 or 6 more articles that were all related to unpacking the actual problems of gun violence in the United States and actual ways to fix it and things that don't work. And after that was done, I started grinding on trying to figure out why the media was depicting everything wrong and why we couldn't come to a national consensus about gun policy. And it had to do largely with the fact that people's perceptions of reality were different and wrong. And so without a shared perception of reality, you can't begin to have a discussion. And then why does that happen?
Okay. Shared sense of reality. Part of what's lurking behind this conversation here is modernity. And what modernity and secularism offered was, I think, a sense of openness, but underneath it, a pretty solid conceptual assumption of certain things. And now, as we're getting beyond it, we're seeing that assumption go away, and that's now bringing in a lot of chaos. As I mentioned on this morning's question and answer, I've been reading C.S. Lewis's A Pilgrim's Regress and loving it. Now, this is a book that Lewis wrote quite soon after his Christian conversion. And it's a flawed book in many ways that a lot of people have noted throughout. The book's been out almost 90 years now. So it's what's been amazing me by the book is how fresh it is, even though it's 90 years old, with respect to all sorts of things that to us feel terribly de jure. But these old patterns have basically remained the same. And a lot of the players too. In the book, there's basically at one point there's a giant, the spirit of the age. And in another video, I want to talk about how that giant is dealt with by reason. This is very modern, who is divine, who is one of these spirits, as it were. But it's very interesting how why were we able to support a monoculture, and why has it been the internet that has disrupted it?
And it happens largely because of profit motives within our media ecosystem, where people are feeding echo chambers for profit, things they want to hear. And so the tail wags the dog. So then what a media outlet is likely to say is not necessarily something that is true or unique. It is more likely something that echo chamber wants to hear, right?
Okay, now we're continuing to use truth as such in a fairly modernist way, and that's fine because I've got to stop these guys from smoking out there.
So then the blog stopped being largely about guns and started being about media criticism. But as that developed and you started to see more of the dynamics in play, it's like the media are trapped in this sort of game theoretical Nash equilibrium of peddling things to echo chambers, right? And once I started unpacking that, I stumbled into things, honestly, like Rebel Wisdom, who were looking at the sense-making crisis, right? And the sense-making crisis analysis back then was really tight, and it was, I did a podcast with Peter Lindbergh and Jordan Hall and that kind of thing, digging down into that, and all of that sort of matriculated right before COVID hit. And then what I've seen now really is that the people who were screaming about the sense-making crisis in 2018, they have lost all their sense-making ability post-COVID because they're trapped in elements of the sense-making crisis itself and don't realize that they're trapped in it because they forgot all the stuff they were talking about then, and now they're talking about other stuff now. And it's interesting watching Rebel Wisdom pivot into the COVID discussion, and then other affiliated folks pivot into the COVID discussion and take different platforms and different takes. and the name of the publication was Hand Waving Freakoutery, because that was basically the mechanic of what was our sense making crisis, our sense making capacity as a people had turned into profitized panic, right? Which is a topic that you guys have covered before. So, we're in a similar space. We're kind of parallel tracks. I don't know that.
Okay, so sense making, and I want to get to the point where he basically
all the analysis I've seen on Rebel Wisdom exactly matches up with our analysis framework at my publication, but it's close. It's close enough to where it'll, with some terminology overlap, you can pretty much talk the same language. So,
yeah, I mean, let's dig in a minute into how COVID has just been sort of dragged into this same dynamic, and what the dynamic, what the kind of the generator patterns are that are creating that dynamic. But I was interested in what you just said about how the people who are paying most attention to the sense-making crisis have actually now been caught up in it because of COVID. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think the easiest example for people who are within the sort of Rebel Wisdom media ecosystem are the fact that Brett Weinstein and Sam Harris went completely opposite directions, right? I mean, that's obvious. It's like, well, they went like that, completely to other sides of the coin. And
not just opposite directions, but these people who were sort of on the same page in terms of the IDW, yada, 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 suddenly they're fighting. And they're not, they're losing their capacity to deal productively with each other, which is a failure in, I think of Ryan, it'll come up. It's Ryan, the IDW protocol stuff. And okay, so so how do we conceptualize this? Why would they start thinking so differently, and why do we care about it? Now, a lot of this I was playing with in, what video was it? It was this video. Will IDW 2.0 have Philea Sophia flow instead of Philea Nikia? And maybe I still have the drawings on my whiteboard. So I was talking about centered set and bounded set. I was watching all of the little infightings in the little evangelical tribal world, where someone sent me on the Discord, sent me a video with Doug Wilson talking about gospel-centered, gospel coalition, how that centered didn't protect them against the downfall of the definition of justice. And I watch Christian Kobes Dumais and Neil Shenvi on opposite sides. And why would Neil Shenvi, being this evangelical code checker, have in some ways be aligned more with someone like Jordan Peterson, who his code won't check at all in terms of the way Neil Shenvi operates, versus someone like Kristen Kobes Dumais, who just on Twitter again declared her Calvinist bona fides. And so that's the dynamic of these conversations is really crucial. I didn't know if I was going to pull out the whiteboard or not with this. Okay, so in, let's say, 2018, you've got Sam Harris, Brett Weinstein, and Jordan B. Peterson, all sort of on the same side with respect to, let's say, wokeness. But then now come 2021, and you've got Brett Weinstein and, let's say, Jordan B. Peterson. He's a little bit further over here. And then you've got Sam Harris, more on the let's say that's this. These are the thesis, COVID, and these are the antithesis, or as Rebel Wisdom would say, the heterodox. And of course, Rebel Wisdom is trying to sort of oh shucks, come on. is trying to sort of stay in the middle and see both sides, and they're trying to evaluate. And of course, he's articulating that to be something about, let's say, truth. All right. So this is sort of the transformation between 2018, where they were all on the same side, and now suddenly they're on the other side. And so what's beneath the noticing this conversation and being anxious about it? Now, again, it's in some ways all about, in the modernistic sense, the truth. What is the truth about COVID or wokeness or vaccines or masks and all of this? We want to get at the truth. Now, that's one way of looking at it. It's not a bad way of looking at it, but it's, in many ways, the big questions are, how should we live? To get a vaccine or don't get a vaccine, to wear a mask or not a mask? How do we posture ourselves in public? Now, on one hand, if you sort of use the truth way of going about it, it's very third personal, and the what should I do is very first personal. But as I mentioned before, what we deal with is really sort of the flow of what happens in society, because in many ways what we're looking at with each other is, where do I gain status or lose status depending on which side of this I'm at. Now, as we noted, that for some you will gain status, let's say with the blue church, but you will lose status with red religion. And so these forces then sort of hollow out the middle. And of course, in some ways, Rebel Wisdom wants to be here in the middle, getting the best sense making they can get. And again, sense making is all about the two registers.
You know, if you try and figure out, this doesn't make a lot of sense to people who had like invested their faith in the intellectual dark web as a sense-making apparatus, right? We're like, why are they going opposite? But for people who had stepped out of the sort of like intellectual dark web worshipers and were looking more at the sense-making crisis itself, it makes complete sense that they would go opposite directions because of how the sense-making crisis evolves, right? It's all about people not having the same shared understanding of the world, right? And so you would expect.
And where does that understanding of the world come from? Well, it comes from all sorts of places, but it comes from your background. It comes from your social groups. It comes from the people that you will lose status or gain status for certain positions from. And that's a very live, very powerful, dynamic system.
Expect that two people have different understandings of the world to go different directions with this thing. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And the more profound thing is it's kind of happening to everyone at the same time. And even, government officials, your local doctor, like if you pick two different doctors, they're going to have two completely different opinions about how to treat COVID, particularly in the early stages. So then that impacts the sense-making crisis is impact.
Okay, so now what are we seeing? We're seeing the recession of modernity. Because, doctors, what are doctors? Doctors are practitioners of science who attempt to apply the truth of science down to you as a person. That's what doctors are supposed to do. And in some ways, it's analogous to preachers. So this is sort of the modernistic understanding. So you've got truth. I'll have to. Oops, no, come on. You've got truth way up above, and the doctor or the preacher delivers that truth down to the individual. They're very much a mediator. But what happens when the doctors are all on different pages? Suddenly, your faith in this entire system begins to get shaken. And suddenly, it's not one truth that you're dealing with. It's all of these different schools. And then you're looking for, and this has been the way in religion for a long time, you're looking for a preacher, let's say a Roman Catholic preacher or a Protestant preacher. And so suddenly we're off in these different spaces. Now, what modernity tried to do is tried to get rid of this division because, of course, in some ways we're looking at the Protestant Reformation and the dividing up of Europe, and said, well, let's just have one truth based on empiricism and one sort of correlational understanding. When I was talking about the concordism between, it really shouldn't be this way. It should probably be more mind and matter. This is what truth is, or let's say language. Oh, gotta keep adjusting this. And physics. And this is what we understand truth to be. And if we can do this, then suddenly we can have science deliver this to us. Now, of course, it'll be a doctor. And then the doctor will tell me what to do about COVID. But of course, all of the religion stuff is, well, how exactly does that work? And then you get presuppositionalism. And so now basically with the recession of modernity, everyone is a presuppositionalist. And, well, this is going to be a crisis, of course, of government. Because in the modern place, this was supposed to be based on science, and you heard that all the time. We're going to do what the science tells us to do, but that's not really the way science works. Science, as John Vervaeke nicely said, is a method.
People's personal health at that point. And we've jumped from it being really just kind of a concept in 2018 to it being something so profound in 2020 that it is deciding it's a matter of life and death for some people, and nobody realizes that it is because they're all stuck in it. It's that bad. It's pretty terrifying and strange.
Was it inevitable that COVID was going to be dragged into this?
I think it's inevitable that all things are going to get dragged into this. I think this is such a profound problem that it is so deep and it is so irrecognizable for most people that we need to expect that every issue that ever could matriculate is going to be subject to this sense-making crisis until it is solved. And the only area I have seen attempt to solve it is, unfortunately, China. And China is doing it by establishing a government-approved narrative and extreme censorship. It's like the only way that they've been able to get out of it. And
that, of course, shouldn't be a surprise, since the Chinese government, passed through communism, and communism basically was a previous iteration of that. We will define the truth. We will not be open to the truth. And they might try to locate science under that, but of course, it's going to start to mess with their science as well. And all of these admonitions from someone like Jordan Peterson that says, tell the truth or at least don't lie. Oh, it's China. The government's going to have difficulty with that, as if our government hasn't had difficulty with that, and every government has.
Everybody else is stranded in it, right? Because of the game theoretical dynamics of how information is shared.
And this then gets into the, let's see, the third personal is always the view from above. It's a monarchical vision. We set aside the first personal. Imagine we go up to the third personal, just say how it is. The problem is now that we have lots of groups saying, no, this is the third personal. What's really happening here, every time you hear someone say that, including myself, what's really happening here, and then of course the problem is that they're looking at different screens. In some ways it's Scott Adams' two movies.
Something else you mentioned offline, which is everyone who talks about the sense-making crisis likes to say, oh yeah, well, they're obviously captured, but no one realizes that they're captured as well.
Everyone's captured by this. I'm captured by this. And
this is Calvinist total depravity right here. None of us can wield the third personal because we are not God. Total depravity doesn't mean that each of us is as depraved as we can be. That's not it. It's that it's horizontal and that everything that we do is limited and captured. We always see from the first personal, even when we're trying to get to the third personal. As, again, Jonathan Peugeot said to Andrea with the bangs, how do I talk to a physicist? It's a pattern seeing a pattern. And so if you're in a Jeep on safari trying to get video footage of that cheetah running, chasing the gazelle, the camera moving will make the gazelle look like this and the cheetah. You say, wow, those cheetahs really bounce. Now, if you stop, no, the cheetah is running. But if you're taking film from the camera, it looks like this. It's the pattern seeing the pattern. And now with the recession of modernity, what we're noticing is, oh, I can't really do the monarchical vision. We can do bits and glimpses from it. And in fact, we have to, but it's all the personal stuff that we're really going to have to major in.
You are captured by this. And because there's an inability to be able to take a wider breadth because of the fundamental natures of the sense-making crisis itself. Now, Rebel Wisdom has covered this in depth.
So again, each of us is limited in terms of what we can take in, and the limited amount of knowledge we have, which in fact is selective, and selective at many layers down. For example, I was skimming an article about something, and immediately my eyes caught a particular word. Now, my eyes had seen the word already, but actually a better way of thinking about what I'm doing is not so much me sitting there reading. There's actually sort of a consciousness congress back there, and I'm going along, and one of the members of the consciousness congress says, stop. There's something that I'm interested in. Bring the eyes back up and have it check for this word over here. This is the selection of attention. It's why if I open my door one morning to my office and there's a king cobra coiled up on the floor, all kinds of other stuff might have changed in my office, but I will look right at that king cobra first. That's the machinery of my mind built into me from generations of development that says the king cobra takes priority. There's the portion of our mind that, why it's so hard not to flinch, that if I'm walking along and let's say I'm walking next to a schoolyard where kids are throwing or kicking balls, and there's a ball coming towards me that my conscious mind doesn't have time to register and see, I will still duck. That's how we're working. But now expand that to all of the major issues. We can't see everything, And we have our biases, and they're not only these cognitive biases, there are these communal biases, because these biases scale and go all the way up.
But some of their analyses are deeper and I don't want to say convoluted because it has a negative tone, but more complex than I think they need to be. I think you can really probably summarize the whole thing in about 2 or 3 minutes, and we can open with that if you want. So, yeah, let's here and crack my knuckles here.
Yeah, you said you could
the
do it.
internet
Better
connects
do it.
the entire world and creates an infinite, not an infinite, but the upper bound of information is no longer how many newspapers there are. It's the number of people they are, right? So that upper.
Okay, so we already knew that the world was too complex for us to take in. Okay? Just like my office is too messy. The world is too complex. And this was the heart of what Jordan Peterson was trying to communicate to Sam Harris in their first stage video interview conversation with Brett Weinstein. The world is too complex. The filters that we bring to the world have been shaped and molded into us from a great deal of time. And this is Vervaeke's relevance realization. So the world is too big, the world is too complex. Now, whereas the certainty we had before from, it might have been your church, it might have been the media, that was New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, in other words, sort of the blue church. That was it. That was your truth, delivered for you, pre-filtered, pre-digested, pre-given to you, and in fact, you needed it. And of course, there are layers above all of this too.
Upper bound of available information vastly exceeds anybody's ability to process it all, right? So it used to be that there was a world, and then our visions of the world were mitigated by media organizations and books and publishers and things like that. And they were the gatekeepers of truth. And was their truth always right? Not necessarily, but the fact that the truth was conveyed was something that everybody agreed on, made it easier for us to interact as a society, even if perhaps we were interacting in the wrong way. Like there's a case that we never should have gone to Vietnam and had that war. And the reason why we went there was because the sense makers were duping us, for instance. But the fact that there was a shared narrative about what was going on did allow people to come together and achieve a task. Even if the task's bad, they can at least get together and achieve a task. But at the same time, there's a social layer of it that is underappreciated, in my opinion. A lot of the folks, talking about the social dilemma and all that kind of stuff, screaming about algorithms. Well, yes, but people also self-sort among people who are like-minded. And the greatest counterexample I have to the idea that Facebook is the one that's doing this is Reddit, right? I mean, Reddit's algorithm is extremely simple. You join a group of like-minded people, and the like-minded people either upvote or downvote an article, and the upvotes get to the top and the downvotes go to the bottom, which tightens the echo chamber inside what you joined. And there's nothing else to it than that. Their algorithm is extremely simple. It's not AI. It's not driven to make you go insane. It's not driven to engage traffic. All it is just, do you like this or not? It's just the thumbs up, thumbs down. So the fact that there is even a thumbs up, thumbs down is a social algorithm that's baked into human minds. And it is, in my opinion, more powerful than any kind of Facebook algorithm that drives engagement that they could have.
Okay. That's community. And we've always had it. So the church, whereas on one hand we think of them as an institution, the church has always been a community. And the media, they've always been a community. The communities mold us, and we either gain status or we lose status depending on whether or not we are participating in the groupthink of the community. And so the old model, which imagined that the person just sees the truth person just sees the truth. Well, there's modernity for you. When in fact, this truth is coming at them through the communities, filtering the communities, what is salient, what is relevant, all of this stuff. And again, this is the stuff we've been talking about a lot with respect to this sense-making culture.
Okay, so there's two layers to that algorithm. So when we start pivoting over to getting all our news from social feeds, then it becomes extremely important for media agencies to feed an echo chamber what it wants to hear. Because the moment they feed their own echo chamber something that it doesn't want to hear, they lose subscriptions or they don't get clicks. That was the state of the thing when I stepped into the looking at gun policy thing. It became very obvious that what they were doing is feeding people what they wanted to hear, and they were manipulating statistics to do so. I think.
And if you want to hear more of this, go to David Fuller's conversation with Megan Dahm. They made exactly the same points there. Now, we're getting filtered by this. I mean, let's not forget that we are participating in this, but you can't but help participate in any of this. There's no other way to process. This is what we are stuck with. We try to improve it, but this is what we got.
The bottom level of the sense-making crisis is something that I don't think relevant wisdom has touched on at all. And this sounds a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, but I'd like to lay it out at least for consideration. So I'm not saying necessarily believe me on this, but consider this. So when you're interacting with your Facebook feed, you have a series of things. They scroll past. You have the option to either like or share them, right? Same kind of thing for Instagram and all the other social media stuff. You have a feed of information. You decide whether or not to share this information, decide whether or not to upvote this information. That's what a neuron does in a brain. Okay. So a neuron has a nucleus, the nucleus attached to dendrites. The dendrites get signals, which is binary signals from other neurons. And then however those come in, the neuron has some kind of generator function inside of itself that evaluates that and decides whether or not to fire a signal down the axon, and then that goes off to other neurons, right? That's what you're doing on your Facebook. You're behaving as a neuron in a brain. And when things go viral, when things propagate through social networks, I mean, there's a lot of study on this, it looks kind of like a brainwave, right? It looks like something that's passing through a brain.
Now, I've spoken about this before. Let's conceptualize humanity as, just pick a metaphor that's de jour, a computer. We're a massive processing machine that we are working out and working through content, material, ideas, all of this stuff. We're just one level up. And he's saying the neurons, we're like talking about fractals, the neurons, they're all doing this. Now we're all doing this. Now, node in the network, this, conceiving of humanity as a giant thinking machine, but it's not just thinking in terms of upper register mind theoretical stuff. No, we're running these experiments. And again, you can look at Jordan Peterson's, well, we use our imaginations to run experiments so that our bodies don't have to die. Yeah, but we're also using our bodies, and we've got, so let's say I'm going to run the alcoholic homeless experiment, and I decide I'm going to drink my way out of all of my social relationships, out of my job, out of my marriage, out of my family, and I'm going to live on the street. Well, that's an experiment. And where does that experiment go? Now, will I achieve some thoughts and perspectives that I can't achieve living in a house with a wife and in relationship with adult children, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, I'll gain insight, but at what cost? And so when you think about across the board of humanity, one way of thinking about what we're doing is we're working on something. Do we know what we're working on? No, we don't. We're going to get into that soon, but I love this sort of level up metaphor that he's working.
The rub is this. The rub is several things. Is first off, the neuron doesn't know what the brain's thinking. The neuron exists at a level down from the brain.
That's key. The neuron doesn't know what the brain's thinking. The neuron's just processing. I remember when J.P. Marceau talked about panpsychism. Now, I'm still not a panpsychist, but I have a better understanding about why people have this idea. How much consciousness does that little neuron have? But it certainly isn't aware of the brain. And those of you who follow me on Twitter know where I'm going in this, because I watched this video and I thought, oh my goodness, we talked about this a few months ago. And we'll get there in this video.
So if you and I and everybody else were participating as neurons in a brain, we could not even comprehend the thought that the brain is having, because that thought is one level up.
Now, this is sort of where we get to when we talk about the monarchic vision and our imagined mastery of the world. And the deep frustration we have when the rest of our other little thinking neurons here don't go along with what we imagine the world is for and about and should be about and what its end should be.
Right? It's like a Kurzweil singularity thing. It's like the next level intelligence. How would you even know that there's a next level intelligence? You couldn't talk to it. Right? So postulate for a moment that if you could web enough people together in a like and share network, that they would exceed a certain level to where their network itself was effectively a thinking superorganism, one level up from them. And that there's no way you could know that one way or another. Like the
thinking superorganism. Now, being a pastor, well, you would call this its body. And in church language, it would be the body of Christ. But the body of Christ has a head. And the head is Christ. And now head means not only the metaphor of this on here, but also head means source, as in the headwaters of the Nile. So, I mean, he starts talking and it's like, oh, look, we're doing theology. And we didn't even realize it.
thing I'm talking about right now is kind of unprovable. Now,
Unprovable? Well, why? Well, because you're down here and your lab is over here. And you have no, remember how Peugeot and how many of these conversations says, where are you standing? You do not have the position. These markers have to be a little. Let's see if we can do that. You do not have the position to see this entire thing, even though to some degree that's what we're trying to do in this conversation. But with sufficient humility, you realize this is only sort of my third personal perspective, because my first personal perspective starts way down here, and it's going to be trying to see all of this and maybe look up and see the head, or look back and see the head, etc., 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 etc. I again, someone sent me this video and said, so someone I was in my estuary group said, Paul's really got to see that video, and they were right.
Postulate that if you had some people in one social network, some other people in another social network, those two social networks might have these kind of internet entities that are thinking different things and are competing with each other for overall available brain space in the human population to survive.
Wow. Again, this is just straight out of the New Testament. You have principalities and powers. Or how about the book of Daniel? You've got the prince of Persia standing in the way of the angel that's trying to get to little old Daniel. Well, how is the prince of Persia standing in the way of getting to little old Daniel? Oh, shoot, did I destroy that? That one board? I don't think so. Here it is. You have to, we experience this all the time with our different little, he's calling them echo chambers. How to convince your father or your mother or your son or your daughter or your neighbor or the citizen that is within your gates of a different perspective. You have to go through their principality. They have a patterned way of thinking. They have a patterned way of belief. Now, again, in modernity, belief is so abstracted, but they have a patterned way of life. They have a patterned way of behavior that is dominated by their principality. And the only way that that is going to change is if a stronger principality comes and unseats it. Red pill, bread pill, conversion, transformation. A stronger power has to take hold of it and exorcise it. Why is it that I keep calling Jordan Peterson the unauthorized exorcist? Well, because what is he doing? He is exorcising people who have been in domination. They have had a place in the matrix, a place in the superorganism, and they are pulled from that and they are brought into another one. I mean, these conversations, this is what drove me crazy when I first started doing this, because my other clergy couldn't see because they're all dominant within, basically so deep within the church organism that they couldn't see out of it. This is all New Testament language that's going on here.
So there's some talk in like very dark intellectual circles that I traffic in where they're calling these things egregores, because that's what an egregor is. Like the definition of an egregor was, it was a kind of demon that manifests out of a shared belief system.
A demon that manifests out of a shared belief system. Oh, you mean like school spirit? You mean like the spirit of your church or the spirit of your club or the spirit of your family or the spirit of your city or the spirit of your nation or the spirit of your tribe or the spirit of your political party or the spirit of your Discord server or the spirit of your conversation? It's a manifest out of a shared. But now, again, we imagine, whiteboard, work like I want you to. Now, in a materialist framework, we imagine that this is emanation from below. Oh, I'm sorry, not emanation. See, it's really bad when I don't say the right words. This is emergence from below, because matter is foundational and spirit is imagined to be derivative. And so here, this egregor is what these people are creating. Now, the reason that he's saying it this way is because he is deep, again, within a modernist culture. And we don't have, it's not that we don't have language. We've banished language because actually this egregor, he had to pull it back from another source and bring it back into our period and say, oh, look, this is a spirit that is, but here's the question. Is it emergence, or has this spirit lived before? Are there, in fact, a world of spirits that are, in fact, competing against each other and vying for, let's say, remember back in the old days, now I'm an old guy, so I remember these things. You know, back in the old days when computing power was highly limited, and if you wanted, let's say at your college, there was a mainframe and you needed to find time on the computer to get the computer's attention. It's kind of what we do with a parent. It's kind of what we do with a celebrity. We try to get attention from the computer because it's limited. Well, what if the spirits are vying for us? Now, to me, this brings up C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. Because what Lewis basically postulates is that, yeah, the spirits are vying for us. They want us for food. But the Father above wants us for sons who can participate. So right here you have emergence and you have emanation. And then the only question is going to be, okay, so we know we can participate in school spirit. A truly powerful leader, someone who is powerful spiritually, might turn the course of school spirit. Principals try to do that, but they actually look to students, because even in a school, the principals are limited by their standing and the students are limited by their standing. But in terms of participation and collaboration, if, let's say, the principal and the faculty and the student council, and notice that they've all developed a hierarchy, if they all get together and work together, they can change the spirit of the school. Now, we think of it going in this direction, which is perfectly fine. We might think of it in terms of substituting one spirit for another. Because, well, let's just think about this for a moment. There's a world of complexity and nuance out there, but when we read history, don't we recognize things? So, yeah, it's low resolution. Yeah, it's limited in participation, but some spirits come around again. In fact, when Jordan Peterson and many in the IDW 1.0 are anxious about what wokeism is going to do, they are worried that the spirit, let's say the spirit of communism, is going to once again descend and occupy the people. This isn't new to us. We don't talk like this most of the time, but isn't this exactly what we're talking about?
And I think it's possible that we are so far down the sense-making rabbit hole that those kind of things are literally the things that are influencing people's behavior at this point. For some of people,
it's kind of like a cross between
Before you said all of us, and I'm going to hold you to that, because this kind of thing is occupying all of our behavior. We, in fact, are in the clutches of spirits. And when you can't talk your political rival, your political adversary, as a pastor, I deal with this all the time. People, of course, if they're having money trouble or health trouble, they'll talk about that. But the really stubborn things that drive us crazy are relational trouble. Why? Because just like with school spirit, we might yell as loud as we can at the pep rally, and we might go and faithfully cheer the basketball team or the football team, and we might participate in the marching band or the pep band, and we might be elected student council president. We might put up lots of posters. It takes a lot to move spirits. We are very weak and very inept. Well, how would you grow in spirit? Well, it's obvious we're going to do things relationally, but it's also going to be working on us from what? Well, we have to surround ourselves with spiritual things that impact our spirit. And that's going to be, well, it's where you put your attention. It's worship. It's what you're looking at and reading and what you're meditating upon and what is forming your body and the practices that you undergo to pursue that. And then you become stronger spiritually, and then you can actually have an impact on other people, because that is always the test. The spiritual person, now again, you must test the spirits, but the spiritual person has a power with others.
A hive mind and a emergent. It's kind of like a cross between a hive mind and a emergent phenomenon of the sense-making crisis.
But again, he's not looking up, and you really should look up. And again, think about, I tease Mark Lefebvre, but Mark Lefebvre is really doing, let's use blue, really doing important work here, because let's say you have the vault above, And let's say you have Earth below. Well, let's fatten up Earth's lines too. All these lines too. You have the Earth below, then the mountains and the seas. And let's say you have the world of the spirits in the middle. And again, this was how every culture sort of began when the West found them. Well, these spirits are going to be coming and going, interceding in the middle all over the place. This is, in fact, the three-tiered world. You have the top, which is God. You have the middle, gods, spirits, and you have us, who are still spiritual, but also where heaven meets earth here. And then you're going to have more levels of consciousness below. And again, we'll get to that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, all of the elements for the sense-making crisis create fertile ground for hive minds to develop, and the hive minds would exist at a layer up that you would not be able to tell that they existed. Is that true? I don't know.
Yes, it is.
The thing that I've been thinking about recently, and it seems very explanatory for some of the stuff that's going on. If you, I was on a Twitter conference call.
Just to kind of stop there for a second. So
yeah, let's expand on
that. I mean, I've heard the term Egregor before. I think where it becomes useful is whether it has any explanatory capacity. Right? Does it make sense to say, well, the woke Egregor is behaving like this, or the MAGA Egregor is behaving like this?
Right.
And if it does, and I've seen people use that in a kind of shorthand way where it seems to make some useful sense, then in a way, for me, that's kind of...
Why do you have to name the spirits? Well, you have to name the spirits. Once you have a name for the spirit, you have a degree of hold on it. Now, anybody coming from a Pentecostal situation, or anyone with experience in exorcism, and I know I just caught the attention of a whole bunch of you, not that uncommon in Pentecostal circles, deliverance ministries, spiritual oppression, not just spiritual possession. Well, you've got to name the spirit. Well, why are we always looking for, it was critical race theory? Well, that got all complex, so that name wasn't quite right. It's wokeism. Okay. Well, there's issues with the name, but that's what we're using right now, wokeism. And now we've got the Egregor, and we're going to use that name. And we're looking around for names, because once you name it, well, now you've got a handle on it. And someone might say, well, yeah, but that's always true. Yeah, it's always true. Well, that doesn't mean like spirits. What are you still thinking in a Cartesian dualism, that spirits are these other things? And now, again, and this is the same issue I bumped into when I had my second conversation with Jonathan Peugeot. Some of you at that point would be wondering if I somehow was slipping back into modernism and skepticism. No, I'm not. I'm saying that this is the way the world is. Well, now I've just slipped over on the other side of the line, and I'm a crazy Pentecostal or some person who doesn't believe in the Enlightenment. No, modernity is receding. And what we are understanding is that modernity, sort of as Christianity light, covered up a whole bunch of things. And now that it's going away, we're saying, oh yeah, Egregor, that word helps us understand how the world works. And these people are in the grips of a certain principality, and something stronger needs to come and move them. And you say, well, that's all exaptive, three-dimensional. Yeah, it is, because that's how we are, the exaptation. But it's that picture thinking. All these pictures are limited. Think about my conversation with Brett Sockold. All analogies are limited, but analogies are necessary. Because we are amphibious, spiritual, material creatures, we are always going to be working right there at the boundary between the upper and the lower register.
Kind of the test of whether, it's not necessarily whether the test of whether it's true, but it certainly is a test of whether it's pointing towards a phenomenon, a potentially underlying phenomenon that is real.
Underlying or phenomenon from above? See, again, the materialist, it's underlining. No. Is it merely emergence, or is it also emanation?
Right. I mean, like, the test of whether this concept is of value is whether it's useful. And ultimately.
The test of the dog's belief in me is whether the dog's belief in me is useful. I've got that dog by a leash. I keep that dog in my fenced-in yard. Does the dog have that much power? We talk as if we're somehow in charge and in control and, we can make things happen like we want. No, but then we bump into these other people, and these other people are in the clutches of these egregores, and we have no such power to exercise them. And so we level up with videos and with media and with influence and with all of these things in order to try and get a handle on these egregores. Well, my dog is always, when I had a dog, my dog died, but my dog was always trying to get a hand up on me. My dog weighed less than 20 pounds. I weigh 240. My dog saw the world with its tiny little brain. It had an amazing nose and amazing ears, but my dog was no match for me. Now, let's just all be skeptical about the power of these egregores, and, well, the test of it will be how useful they are. Well, I was very useful to my dog. I provided my dog free food, free health care, all kinds of things. My dog also provided me things. I loved my dog. I kept my dog around. But when the dog was too sick to make it reasonable for the dog to keep going and the dog got too old, we put the dog down. In collaboration with a veterinarian and the laws of the state of California, we decided to end the dog's life. Now, we believe that was the humane thing to do, but that word simply accentuates who exactly was making the decisions. I didn't want my dog to suffer. He was clearly in pain. There wasn't really anything reasonable that the doctor could do for the dog to prolong the dog's life, so we lovingly gathered the family together, and with tears in our eyes, we took the life of our dog. Do we really think we are in charge? I'm not saying we're impotent. I'm not saying we have no participation. I'm just saying we have to remember who and what we are.
What you like is for it to be predictive. It's tough to make predictions. Sometimes
why is that?
I'll give that a shot,
Me too. We had our 2022 predictions program, and you know what? It was highly unpredictable. I didn't know that Father Steve was going to join us. That just happened. Julian came in. I didn't know that would happen. He joined us. Every time I have a Thief in the Night live stream, people pop into the Discord server and they bring me new ideas. And, well, what they're really doing is, well, it's all about spiritual tussling.
One of my predictions for the woke egregore inside the next year is that they abandon Latinx entirely. I think they're probably going to ditch that. And then they're going to forget that they ever.
Saw one thing on Twitter, something to the effect that I think I'm indigenous, therefore I am indigenous. And Karen asked something to the effect of, well, isn't that cultural appropriation? But what he says right here, this is quite true.
Every Latinx. One of my predictions for the woke egregore inside the next year is that they abandon Latinx entirely. I think they're probably going to ditch that. And then they're going to forget that they ever did it after they ditch it, in the way they forget some of their other indoctrinations that get deprecated. because that's kind of how their egregore is really interesting, because it's got a really rigorous morality, but it also has update mechanics to its morality. And their update mechanics are so good that they memory hole what they used to do, and then they forget that they ever did it, and then they're all doing something else.
Now, part of what happens with skepticism about religion is we say, we can't know anything about these spirits. Oh, that's not true. My dog knew a great deal about me. The dog knew when I'd get up. The dog knew when I was coming home. The dog knew all sorts of things about me. The dog, in fact, made a careful study of me. Now, the dog could not understand all that I am, because, in fact, I am levels above the dog, but the dog could know me. And so, yeah, these egregores, we can study them and we can predict, and we can do some of that. We can sort of predict, but always the complexity of what rolls out will be a little different from what we were seeing before.
And there's a lot of anti-woke people, and I don't profess to be in the woke or the anti-woke space. I'm kind of like, when I step into this, I'm more in the social analysis space. I view it as just something else to analyze. I think a lot of the anti-woke folks don't even realize how wokeness works. But I think, the woke egregore, if we're going to use that phrase, is very mature, because it's been going for a long time, and it was one of the early ones that were born, because it was born among a people who have been online and plugged into social media for decades. It's had time to evolve.
Oh, it's older than that. It's way older than that.
Some of the other ones are newer, and so they're not as robust. They haven't got their update mechanic stuff totally figured out yet, that kind of thing.
I'm sure some of you are thinking about Neil Gaiman's American Gods right now.
But that's what I've seen with that, and what we've seen, right, really, is the emergence of COVID narrative egregores that are allied to other egregores by Venn diagram overlap proximity. So now
he's going to talk about COVID for a while, and not my area of terrific interest. All right, so we'll get beyond some of the COVID stuff and jump back in towards the end.
I mean, the interesting thing for me, I guess, is that we look back at Trump, and Trump as a kind of accelerator of the sense-making crisis in 2016 to 2020, and there was a brief period where it felt like, I certainly think around the time of the election and then the handover, I was kind of thinking, wow, this looks and feels like it's heading towards civil war. It's like the temperature was raised massively. But what's interesting is that we maybe got a couple of months of that kind of feeling like, okay, the temperature's gone down, and then now we're in a place where they're different topics, but it feels
now, even that is amazing, because notice how we can sense these things. Now we're right and we're wrong, and we think and we don't. We can't predict the future, but notice how we are so amphibious in terms of upper and lower register. We feel what's going on, and we can't articulate it, but we sense it and we know it. We have spiritual senses. And again, that's exactly the right word.
Like the temperature's raised again. It's now about COVID rather than Trump, rather than wokeness, but we're still in the same dynamic.
I feel as if the sense-making crisis dynamics are going to elevate whatever is going on at any given time to that level, right? Like if you look at COVID, okay, it's pretty bad disease, but it's not the measles, right? I mean, it's not polio. And we've been through periods of history where we had these really bad diseases, and we weren't at the freak outery level that we are now, right? And so what this engine of failed sense making does is it elevates freak outery to the paramount. And if it can't find one thing to freak out about, it's going to find something else to freak out about, and then everybody's in a constant state of panic. So it doesn't. If COVID goes away, it's going to be something else. If that goes away, it's going to be something else. If that goes away, it's going to be something.
I haven't. Sometimes I have conversations with randos, and they haunt me. And I really should I've started editing it to maybe send it back to the rando and say, I edited it. Would you let me release this one? And again, no pressure on this person, because someone that says, I don't want my face and my voice on your channel, I totally understand. That is absolutely and maybe wiser than I. But this person with a great deal of credibility basically said to me, I look around at a lot of the religious people I know, and you can find foolish religious people that you don't admire or emulate at all. And if you don't know any, I can point you to a good number of them. But then there's some others who are just stable. They have ballast about them. They are not easily shaken. Well, why? Well, it's because they've got a spiritual foundation, and they are prepared for these winds of spiritual change. I think about, somebody asked me, how many times do you have Lord of the Rings references in your videos? C.S. Lewis or Tolkien? All the time. So, that point in the movie when Gondor is under siege, and the steward, runs out there and, throw down your weapons, run for your lives. Gandalf comes and just clubs him. Shut up, you fool. Now is not the time for that. Where do you find courage? Where do you find formation? Where do you find ballast? And Jordan Peterson talks about it. When your father or mother has died, who in the family will stand up and help the family do what they need to do? Where do you find that kinds of substance? Not to freak out. Freakoutery is a great name.
Something else. And the more this happens, that's, the freakoutery is the engine for the tightening of the echo chambers and the strengthening of the egregores. So that's what the 21st century potentially looks like.
And I love, the bridge at Khazad-dûm. Gandalf tells everyone else, fly. This is not an enemy that swords will help you, even though you'll see Gandalf cleave him with a sword as they go down into the depths. But it's all this symbolism. And again, the exaptation, we see it all spatially. We represent it in physicality. And for those of you who are Tolkien nerds know that there's this big debate over whether the Balrog basically is our size, or the Balrog has these horns and the wings, and like you saw him in the movie. What is the Balrog? But part of the point is the horns and the wings are all to represent power, because size and power go together with us in the physical realm. But of course, the Balrog's power is not simply physical, because remember, spirit moves matter. When Jesus talks about the definition of spirit in the Gospel of John, you don't see the spirit, but you see when the wind blows the trees. And remember, spirit and wind are the same word. That's why wind. And so we talk about the winds of change, and we talk about all these metaphors that we use out of our physical space. That's the language that we have that fits us best, that we can, as Vervaeke keeps saying, as we can grasp.
Is just a rolling series of these things. And that's what I've been saying that's why I named the blog Hand Waving Freakoutery. I've been saying that since 2018. When COVID hit, I was like, oh, well, this is obviously going to play out this way. Everybody's looking around like, you're all wrong. And then they're all looking around going, how come everyone's crazy? I'm just looking back at my 2018 articles going, duh. Right? It's just, and also it's going to happen again. And also it's going to happen again. People like fighting wokeness, for instance.
So
No, it was Trump. It was Trump. Or no, it's Biden. No. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Well, ask for the Spirit of God. Why would you ask for a lower spirit? Ask for the Great Spirit. the Spirit of God and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And again, it's a stand because you're not that big. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against all of the other people, but against rulers, against authorities. And this is what Paul is talking about. Against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. That's all you can do. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helm of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert, and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me. And whenever I speak, words that may be given, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery. Now, mystery is not something that can't be comprehended, but the revelation of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Colossians 2. So then, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, it's a very spiritual thing, continue to live your lives in him, in Christ. What on earth does that mean? That's in Christ. Just like he's talking about us being within. Let's see, did I erase that picture? I might have erased it. Yeah. Rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. It's a very joyful picture. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. Hang on, let me look at the Greek. Yeah, philosophy. Dietes philosophia. My Greek always sounds Spanish. Which depends on human traditions and the elemental forces of this world rather than on Christ. So human traditions, that's the emergence, and the elemental forces, that's from above, both directions. For in Christ, all the fullness of the deity comes, the deity lives in bodily form. And in Christ you have been brought to fullness. He is the head over every power and authority. In him you were also circumcised with a circumcision not performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. When you were dead in your sins and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Christ. He forgave us all our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He was taken it away, nailing it to the cross, having disarmed the powers and authorities, those are the spiritual forces, he made a public spectacle of them. Christ crucified, he was made a public spectacle. Paul is taking that image of Christ being made a public spectacle by the principality of Rome and inverts it and says, at that moment, the inversion happened. And in the crucifixion, the principality of Christ was not made a public spectacle, but rather the principality of Rome was shown to be impotent. Now, it would take some centuries, but it would fall to Jesus splayed on a cross. That's what Paul is saying. And what we have here with Rebel Wisdom is an entry into understanding the text of the New Testament.
You said before that you're going to summarize it in 2 or 3 minutes, and you talked for about 25.
Yeah, well,
so Can you summarize?
It was a good talk.
It in 2 or 3 minutes.
The sense-making crisis itself? Gracious.
Yeah.
Let me see. Nigh infinite information and a lack of trusted gatekeepers causes echo chambers, which then feed back on their own information silos to create micro insanities. And the fertile ground of these micro insanities provides purchase for potentially next level group intelligences to emerge that are manipulating the people within the echo chamber to behave in a certain way.
Let's listen to that again.
See the
potential of and lack of trusted gatekeepers causes echo chambers, which then feed back on their own information silos to create micro insanities.
What would be spiritual possession but an insanity? Why is it that in the New Testament these insane people are possessed by spirits? And how can Christ come and exorcise these spirits and then they're sane again? Jordan Peterson was the unauthorized exorcist. He exorcised a lot of people. There's lots of exorcists running around. You find them all over the New Testament. The Jews they were known in the Roman Empire as exorcists often. So all these micro insanities.
And the fertile ground of these micro insanities provides purchase.
Ooh, that's an interesting word.
Potentially next level group intelligences to emerge that are manipulating the people within the echo chamber to behave in a certain way.
So here's your echo chamber. And they have your egregor that emerges up. But again, it's meeting things in the middle. And let's imagine history has traveled Why does history rhyme? It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Why does history rhyme? Well, because we're revisiting these spirits. They go up, they come down. But foolish little us, here we are down below thinking we're calling the shots. Well, then why can't we simply create for ourselves the world that we want? Well, what is we? You're only going to get we in terms of the direction from the whole thing.
And do you see those?
It, yeah.
And do you see those as having agency, or do you see those as being? Because
oh, and then David asks the question: What? These things seem to have agency up here. They seem to be things grab us. Trump just comes into the world suddenly. No, he was around the whole time. But suddenly he's on the stage, and when he descends in that elevator, everyone's laughing. He starts winning primaries. They're not laughing anymore. The man and the moment found each other. Well, do these egregores have agency? Yeah, they have tremendous power. Why do you not want to break with your tribe? What keeps you? What keeps you in this group over here? Again, back to the Megan Dom. What people are silent. They're afraid to talk because they're going to lose status in their tribe if they say the wrong thing. And the cost of hopping to the other side, there's a price to pay for that. These things are powerful. You say, well, do they have agency? They seem to act like they have agency. I mean, David's question here, it's like, well, we have names for them. What kind of agency might they have?
Certainly on the antithesis side, you get the sense that there's always a an active player, whether that's big pharma or whether that's the authorities or whether that's the globalists.
And now notice he didn't name individuals, because together they produce this egregor. They produce something. And the reason that they collaborate, and the reason you have these kinds of dynamics, the reason this group wants to very much keep you in here, is because it's from the people that we develop a lot of the power, but it's also from other ancient things. Why do people use historical arguments? Because if it's perennial, well, it must be true. So the Enlightenment, talk to Steven Pinker. We're not Christian. We're from the Greeks. And Tom Holland comes along and says, how well do you know those Greeks? Have you really read much of them? Because you sound like a Christian in terms of your values. You certainly don't sound like a Greek. Well, the Enlightenment was pretty much a product of Christianity. So agency, big pharma, there's a principality. Powers and authorities, that's what we just read.
Lists or whatever. I mean,
right.
You can kind of name who the them, the they, the them is. Do you think it's the egregor? Is that a replacement? Is that the ultimate kind of prime mover of the behavior, do you think?
I think in my mind that the people blaming big pharma and the globalists and all that kind of stuff are not seeing the bigger picture, which is that this behavior is being enacted by an egregor.
It's a level above them. Remember how he says the brain cells don't know what the whole brain is doing? There's a level going on here. Itself.
Whether egregores have agency, I think is something that, if provided they exist in the way that we frame them here, it is, I think, unknowable. But I know that they're
unknowable, or our knowledge of them will always be limited by virtue of the layer and the level that we are at, because there's more levels.
Primary goal is to survive. If it wasn't, they'd be rubbed out already. And in survival, their primary goal must be to rub out other egregores.
The egregores are at war. Gosh, it's like reading ancient literature. But the amazing thing is that nobody in this conversation is mentioning it. But if you read ancient literature about wars, spiritual warfare, well, there it is. Again, you could read Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness. Lots of stories about spirits. But again, the Cartesian dualism is sort of in something like Frank Peretti. This is different.
So if you see, social behavior that is root deep culture war behavior that is framed around trying to rub out another cultural mindset.
Just look on Twitter every single time. Look on the Facebook threads. Why are people going to Twitter and Facebook and we're just going to keep typing until they stop voting for Trump? I'm just going to keep typing until they stop getting the vaccine. Spiritual warfare. It's what it is.
That's it. You can see it right there, right? Mm. So that's the agency. That's obviously what they must be doing, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily more intelligent than a bug.
They're pretty powerful. What do you mean intelligent? We're going to have to talk about that.
In terms of it's deepest thoughts and feelings or whatever, I don't know. But I don't know that you would be able to do that. I mean, if you were an ant walking through a yard and you look up and see a human, you don't see a next level intelligence. You see an environmental hazard.
And when he said that, a memory took place. Now, I don't always remember everything I read, but I remember a lot of what I hear. And that's always been true of me. I'm a little bit dyslexic. I'm kind of ADHD, but I remember what I hear. Maybe that was because way back in the day, this person, Kay Andreas, came to Eastern Christian and started the Suzuki program, and I came home one day and told my mom, Mom, I want to play the violin. My mom's like, where did this come from? And sure enough, the little letter came home from school and didn't see a sheet of music until third grade, but I learned to play the violin by ear. And that capacity in me was set to have a pretty good ear for a lot of things. And apparently my father, when he was young, played the piano. He played a few times in my memory. But one of his teachers said he had perfect pitch. So somehow in my family, we're a pretty audible group. And my sister she sings well and plays music well. So I remember things and I remember conversations. And when he said that, I thought, oh my goodness, I had a conversation just like this not too long ago. Now, it's always painful to watch yourself because I watch myself sometimes in these videos and I think, oh, I don't know how you managed to do it, but here we go.
Let's say in the same way that once, I'm going to try to use the sense of teleology. Let's say once the form of plant life emerges, then it conduces to the emergence of other plant lives.
Yes.
Once
makes possible. Yes, very much.
Yes. And like same thing, once animal life emerges, it will also conduce towards the possibility of other animal lives. So once that form exists, then you can invoke a kind of teleology towards more of that kind of life. And like, I think I just need like one more layer. Like after you get to the human with Christ, what I want to say is that once Christ emerges, once you have the crucifixion, like this pattern, this seed of the Logos sacrificing himself to show the goodness of all of creation, like this seed is a new kind of life that conduces towards the emergence of more of that kind of life. So I get the kind of teleology, but I don't think I need something, let's say, that's huge and top down, coming down like the sense you get from Aristotle. I think I can get Easter with like maybe just one layer more than what you have in your ontology.
It's the name of this video. Just one layer more.
Well, let me be annoying then, because I could take in the previous arguments, I think, including Tom Holland's argument, and say, no, all I need is that there was a superorganism formed that was able to change a civilization, namely the Christianity and the church. And it's like the team, and there was a team spirit, and it moved through history. And all of this, to get back to the original point, can be explained. I mean, this is part of my work in a completely naturalistic fashion. And that would account for the spreading argument. So what Paul posited, I think brilliantly, also I could appropriate it and say, look, like, do we need anything beyond that? The peak performance, that makes it sound artificial. The peak presence of this super saint Jesus seeded a new kind of Geist, and that is responsible for all of the things that you see in history, and that doesn't need anything other than that to explain it, any more than I have to posit anything before or beyond the Geist of the crew and the machinery navigating the ship through the ocean.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I very much see that. I've had thoughts like that. Here's a fun thing for you two. Let's just building on JP's one level more. I mean, think about what plants know of us. Think about what the we'll use Iowa farmers. Think about what all those Iowa corn stalks know of the farmer. And there's a teleological level above the corn stalk, but the corn stalk doesn't really know the farmer. Yeah. And now let's level up now to the animals and sort of Aristotelian. What do the animals know of us? I mean, the animals are sort of all going, and here are these, these other creatures that come around and do things. And our dogs and our cats and our pets know of us, a little bit, but my dog died not too long ago. And I'd always often watch this dog and think, what am I in this dog-eyed view of things? I'm this, but my dog has a degree. And I love that. What are we to the ant but an environmental hazard? We're the storm coming that threatens maybe to take the ant, but the ants know that there are way more of them than there are of us. I mean, just go ahead and Google just how many ants there are. Degree of consciousness, but I obviously have more consciousness. I've got way more teleology. I mean, that's why we can play tricks on our pets, because we're thinking a level ahead. But we don't see them very well. And of course, then the next level up is, as ancients would have imagined. Well, now what we got in the Rebel Wisdom was the next level up. These egregores. Well, they're sort of this next level up. There's, in the way that the corn in Iowa doesn't see the farmer, we don't see the consciousnesses of those one, and we don't even know how many levels up there are, because not only does the Iowa corn not see the farmer, it doesn't see the farmer's dog either. And in many ways, it's kind of the hints at, you look at ancient cosmologies, this is very much the way they saw the world. And to go back to JP's primary and secondary causation, if I have a field and the grass is too high and I've got a couple goats, I put those goats, and those goats are exercising their agency, eating up all that herbage that I'd like to have eaten, but I set the whole thing up, and what do those goats know of me? So it's just, just one level up. But the difficulty that we have, of course, is in some ways analogous to the difficulty of the corn or the difficulty of the pet. Now, we obviously scale quite a bit dramatically. And again, the leap between the dog and me is a pretty significant leap. And of course, evolution likes to suggest that leap happened over time. And in a strange way, that the middle was hollowed out. And all of our ancestors, we ate our parents, or at least plotted their genocide. But it's just, and then when you think about this in terms of teleological terms, well, the ancients would have been very comfortable with this idea, because they'd look around and say, Odysseus is doing the best he can to, make work his way gods home against each other and work his favorites. And so I don't know, but then we get into, we're sort of like the stalks of corn saying, what are we here for? They don't say that. The dog doesn't say that. We say that. And then, are there levels up? If we can see levels below, are there more up? We don't know. So it's just a thought.
Well, no, it's a good thought. And I mean, I think we've already thought about ways in which we're already even scientifically exploring these levels up and not just the levels down.
Yeah.
By the way, reductionism is anti-nominalist. I just want to be clear about this. Just to nominalism says there are no levels of realness. Reductionism says there are levels of realness. That's exactly what reductionism is. Reductionism and nominalism are inconsistent with each other. The fact that people put them together as if they happily go together is very problematic, because the same way people think that neuroscience and artificial intelligence really sit together very well. No, they don't. Neuroscience says intelligence is dependent on having an organic brain. Artificial intelligence says, no, it's not. There's an inherent contradiction there. I teach my students this. I just want to be clear that we're already living in a multi-leveled, we just put reality at the bottom instead of on the top, but it's the same logical structure.
Now, again, when he says reality, this tends to be the modern habit. No, I moved this below so I can move it back up. This tends to be the modern habit. We think materiality or physics, when, again, I think the Christian perspective is that spirit comes first and matter is its servant. But that's, of course, a Christian assertion.
Just inverted. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't want to privilege emergence or emanation. So I thought maybe you could appreciate that argument. So I think there's good reason for the levels up. I just gave the argument. Secondly, like I said, I think we're empirically studying this now. The whole idea of distributed cognition, collective intelligence, collective computation, all of this is powerful. The thing that is interesting, you invoke the ancient tradition, but I'll invoke part of the ancient tradition too. And the ancient tradition is, especially the Neoplatonic tradition, is very clear that those upper levels don't have consciousness because of the inherent way in which consciousness is bound to time, it's divided against itself, etc. I mean,
so I wanted to make sure I got John's word in there. And again, we've played a lot of the Rebel Wisdom video, and I'm grateful for the generosity of Rebel Wisdom to let their videos be used by me. And you can find this video. I'll have the links to both of these videos below. I think this is pretty much the end of the Rebel Wisdom video.
Right. How would you even know? So
how would you even know? How would the corn stalk, whatever level of consciousness the corn stalk might have, if it has any, how would it know of, oh, boy, feeling strong here in Iowa. Look it. All it is corn. The world is corn. Not to the dog, not to the farmer. The corn's going to go on forever until the reaper comes, and then the corn is gone. And its children, or its genetically modified Monsanto. Let that herbicide reign over me. Keep those weeds away. Anyway.
Nicely summarized.
So, something to think about. Something to think about.